Okay, guys, this is probably going to be two videos. So be sure you look out for the second one where we are doing the quadratic formula. It is pretty time consuming and has a lot of details, so I thought it'd be easier to break it up into certain questions. All right, so up here we have the quadratic formula, but we're going to address a little bit else first. First thing you do is make sure that the equation is set equal to 0. We do that with a lot of stuff. So this is involving solving a quadratic, okay? So this is back to solving, and this is when we cannot factor them. This is when we can't factor them. Then you're going to identify the A, B, and C, which you guys are great at. Then you're going to substitute these into the formula and simplify. So don't be too overwhelmed by the formula. We're going to look at it a little bit. As a reminder, solving equations is finding the x-intercepts, finding the roots, and finding the zeros. So we call solutions, what else do we call them? X-intercepts, because it's where they cross the x-axis. Roots, or zeros. It is also the zeros of the equation, okay? So the first thing I do is I just have a little bit of practice of putting it equal to 0, all right? So if I need to make this equal to 0, I need to move over this minus 12x. How do I get rid of a minus 12x with a plus 12x? Okay, now I would like to point out to you guys that that 12x is the x term, and the x term is always the number in the middle. It's the b term. So when I rewrite them, I always try to remind you guys 4x12 plus 12x minus 9 equals 0. So then you would label your A, B, and C with A, B, and C, and those are the ones you would use. Next equation. We need to set this equal to 0, and I always want to do letters to the left. It just makes it easier on me. So to get rid of a positive, I'm going to do a negative. How do I know that that is a positive? I know that it's a positive because there's no negative in front of it. Okay, so that reduces down. So I have 3x squared minus 122x. So my terms here are actually my A term and my B term. My C term would be, sorry, let's put down here, my C term would be 0. I don't want to confuse y'all. It's not the one over here because this is now equal to 0. Okay, and the last one to set equal to 0 is I need to move over a 5x, and I'm going to line it up under the 2x because they have the same last name, and a minus 7. Just put it over there so I kind of keep them at the same distance. Okay, and when I rewrite it, the x squared is still by itself. These two are going to combine because they have the same last name, means I owe more money, which would be a negative 7x minus 7 equal to 0. You do want to make sure you put them in order because it makes it a lot easier when you label your A, your B, and your C. Okay, so that's just a quick review there. Not sure which ones we're going to do, but sometimes, okay, we've already learned to factor, and that's where what multiplies to give you C but combines to give you B. But sometimes we can't factor, like in this example right here. And that's when we have to use the quadratic formula. And if you guys recall, we had a few in our warm-up even that were not factorable. They just didn't work in any way. So what we're going to do is we are going to use this formula in order to fill it in. And this, the beauty of this formula is it works for everything. Any equation you have, it works for, okay? So definitely use it to your advantage. But the other wonderful thing about it is we get to sing it. That's right. And I mean, in all honesty, I know I do a lot of goofy stuff, but singing it really does help fill it out. And I actually sing it in my head when I do it. And it goes to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel. So it's dun 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 dun. Okay. And what exactly does that mean? Well, if you see, I have it written out right here, but it means x equals the opposite of b. And I had a lot of people will use negative b, but I say opposite because sometimes when it's already a negative, we confuse ourselves. So it's the opposite of b. So whatever your b value is, you'll do the opposite. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, because you're multiplying them, all divided by 2a. So as you do it with your thing, if you follow the mouse, 1, 2, 3, x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And it is really important you realize that negative b is under there, okay? Singing it really does help. I know it seems cheesy, even if you end up doing it in your head, but it really will help. So one more time. 1, 2, 3. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And y'all are going to have an extra credit assignment with that. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to go and we're going to plug this into the quadratic formula. Now, the first thing I need to do is set it equal to 0. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to make sure, is this equal to 0? Yes. So our standard form is up there at the top. Our A, our B, and our C. So these cannot be factored. We cannot use the X for this. Whoops, that was a negative 3. Okay. We cannot use the X because it wouldn't work. So we have to do the quadratic formula on it. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to plug it into the quadratic formula. And anytime we're going to plug it in, oh, you can bet in Miss Richardson's class, we're going to sing it too. 1, 2, 3. X equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. So I just used it to plug in. The opposite of b would be the opposite sign of whatever it is. I'll explain the plus and minus in a second. The square root of negative 3 squared minus 4ac. So you're gonna put in the a, b, and c in there in order to solve it. Okay. Now, when I get to this step in the problem, I like to simplify right here. I like to take these two and kind of break them down right here and simplify them, where I do negative 3 squared first, which is a 9. This will always be a positive number because a negative times a negative is a positive. If you don't put it in parentheses in the calculator, it won't work. Now, I look over here and I have negative 4 times 3 is negative 12 times negative 1 is a positive 12. So 9 and 12 gives me a 21. I always simplify this part of it first. Okay, I always simplify that part first. So I do the first half and then that minus half right there. So the b squared and then the minus 4ac. So I'm going to come down here and I have 3 plus or minus the square root of 21, all divided by 2 times 3 gives me a 6. Okay. Now right here, I take the square root of 21 and do it as a decimal. So I'm going to bring up my calculator. Okay, I'm going to go to the calculate screen. So it's not super intense right here. Let me minimize that for y'all a little bit better so y'all can see it, because I do want y'all to see how to do the math. And I'm going to do the square root of 21. And yes, it is really, really, really important that you do these in steps. So the square root of 21 is, I'm going to put 4.58. So it is a 4.58. These are going to be estimates, okay? Now, what does the plus and the minus mean? When we have a parabola, here's my parabola, and I have the axis of symmetry, right? We have an answer that is plus this distance, and then we have one that is minus this distance. So we have an answer on both directions of the axis of symmetry. So first we're going to find the one that's if we plus from the axis of symmetry. So 3 plus 4.58 divided by 6, and then we have 3 minus 4.58 divided by 6. Now, it is very, very, very important that you do the math on top and then the math on the bottom. So you have to do 3 plus 4.58 and then divide by 6. So you have to hit enter after you do this. I always recommend y'all write it separately. It just saves errors, because if you were to do 3 minus 4.58 divided by 6 in the calculator, that divide is stronger and it's going to do that first, which would not be correct. Okay, so be really, really careful. So you have your two answers. Plug those into the calculator and you should get, and correct me if I'm wrong, 1.26 and negative 0.26. So one is to the right of the axis of symmetry and one is to the left of the axis of symmetry. Now the goal is to get you guys to do it without this form set up right here, okay? But for today, we're just going to work on this. Our first day, we're just going to try and use this form. So let's go to our next problem. Question number 5, okay? Example, excuse me, number 5. So the first thing I need to do is make sure it's set equal to 0. So I'm going to look over here. I need to move that plus 1 over to get rid of a plus 1. I'm sorry, a minus 1. I do a plus 1, thinking ahead, and I'm going to line it up with the 8. So my standard form is going to be x squared plus 6x plus 9. okay? And I'm going to label my A, my B, and my C, which you guys have been really, really good at. A is 1, B is 6, C is 9, okay? And then I'm going to plug it into the quadratic formula, which means I'm going to sing it. So 1, 2, 3. X equals the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC, all divided by 2A. So we are just plugging in each letter as it appears in the formula. Okay, as it appears in the formula. I do recommend you have the formula written on each side of your paper so you always see it right there above you. Okay. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to do the math like I told y'all I do over here. I'm going to go on ahead and say 6 squared is 36. And then I'm going to do negative 4 times 1 is negative 4 times 9 is negative, what would that be, 36? Oh, and 36 minus 36 equals 0. Okay, and then 2 times 1 equals 2. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to fill it in on my next step. So right here I have negative 6 plus the square root of 0, and let's see, divided by 2. So I have negative 6 plus 0 divided by 2 and negative 6 minus 0 divided by 2. So really what these both become is negative 6 divided by 2. Okay, those become negative 6 divided by 2, which is a negative 3. You only have one answer, negative 3, and we've talked about this several times. This is where your parabola just touches the x-axis on the vertex. Okay, so it's only one answer. And technically, we could have actually factored this, but this is just a way to show you. If you struggle with factoring, then go straight to this. This will help you out, I promise. Okay, so now we're going to scroll it down. Are you ready? We're going to go to our next one. All right, number 6. So the first thing I need to do is set it equal to 0. To move that minus 4 over, I'm going to do the opposite, which is plus 4. Doesn't have the same last name as anybody, so that'll be 3x squared minus 6x plus 4. Make sure you put them in the proper order, your B and C in the correct way. And then we're going to label our A, our B, and our C. Okay, A is 3, B is negative 6, and C is 4. Okay, did I write that down correctly? I'm going to check my answer key just to make sure I'm doing it right too, because you know how it goes. All right, yes. So now we're going to plug it into the equation. 1, 2, 3. X equals the opposite of B. So instead of a negative, it's a positive. Plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC, all divided by 2A. And remember, you got to make sure that divide gets up underneath there when we start writing it on our own, which we will in a few examples. So I told y'all what I do here first is I simplify this and I do my two different, oops, I can't find my pen. There we go. I do my two different ones. So negative 6 squared is a positive 36. So negative 6 times negative 6, no matter what, when you square something, it's always positive in math models and algebra. So you do negative 4 times 3 is negative 12 times 4 is negative 48. So whoa, that equals a negative number. And then 2 times 3 equals 6. All right, so I'm going to go down here and I'm going to rewrite that in. And I have 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 12 divided by 6. Now, I don't know what the square root of a negative is, so I'm going to go do it. And you do second x squared to get your square root sign. I forgot to show that to y'all earlier. And you're going to do negative 12. And look what it gives you. It gives you an error. It is a non-real answer. It is not a real answer. You, in fact, cannot take the square root of a negative, okay? Can't take square root of a negative. Now, in Algebra 2 and calculus, you can. It's called an imaginary number, but we're just working with real numbers, okay? So what this means is this is one of those graphs that does not cross the x-axis. It is above it or below it, okay? And if y'all recall, does anybody remember what we called that? We called that no real solution, okay? And it does not cross the x-axis. Okay? So there is no solution. Okay, there is no solution. It's no real solutions. Do you think it's important we see that? Okay, so if it's a negative under the thing, that is an exception to the rule. Always double check your math under there. All right, so now we have one last example with the form, and then we're going to do some without the paper form. Okay, we're going to do some on our own. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to set this equal to 0. And to set it equal to 0, I need to move that 13 over by subtracting it. So my standard form would be 7x squared minus 13, right? And I got to label my A. And then remember, this is our C value. The number by itself is the C value. So that means my B is actually 0. A is 7 and my C is negative 13. So now we got to plug it in. You know this is Miss Richardson's favorite part. 1, 2, 3. X equals the opposite of B. Doesn't have a sign. It's just 0. Plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC, all divided by 2A. That's the strong part you always depend on when you're saying it. Okay, guys? So now we're going to do the thing. 0 squared is a 0. Then we do negative 4 times 7 is negative 28 times negative 13 is a positive 364. So one of the things you can always check is you're going to have a negative times a negative. That's going to be a positive, okay? And then that's going to equal 14. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to rewrite it. So I have 0 plus or minus the square root of 364 divided by 14. The square root of 364 is 19.08. So let's go look at that in the calculator really quick. I, of course, am looking at the answer key. I have worked through all these problems, I assure you. I'm not going to ask you to do something that I haven't done. 3, 6, 4. I'm actually a total nerd. I love the quadratic formula. 19.08. That 7 is going to round up because the number after it is bigger than 5. Okay? So I'm going to come up here and rewrite this as 0 plus 19.08 divided by 14 and 0 minus 19.08 divided by 14. And y'all might look at this and go, but it's going to be the same answer. Well, remember, one of them is to the right of the axis symmetry and one of them is to the left. So while they'll be the same number, one is going to be positive and the other is going to be negative. So you'll do 1908 divided by 14, and then you'll do negative 1908 divided by 14. And the answers you should get is 1.36 and negative 1.36. Again, it's really, really important you do that top math and then the bottom math, okay? Now, this whole time, we have been doing this form. We've been using it really great. So now we're going to go on to the using it without that beautiful setup, okay? Without that